Yo, what's going on? It's Johnny King with another episode of the Becoming Kings podcast. Talk about becoming a king or a king himself. I'm so excited to have Johnny Elsasser back on the podcast. Dude, it's a privilege. You've got a new book coming out. You're doing amazing things. Just happy to have you on, man. Thanks for being here.
Dude, thank you for having me on to support your community again. Another round a couple years later. Hopefully you and I have both evolved since then, So that's always the trick, right? Is if have we evolved really, but appreciate you having me on the show, man. Going to be a lot of fun. And it's already been great catching up with you again before we kick this off. So thanks, brother.
Yeah, of course. I want to get into the new book launch, which is so exciting. And it's a huge feat. But that being said, we already talked before we started recording that I'm going to see you in a week, which will be amazing. That you're going to pass through Austin, Texas, and my listeners know that I'm down here just kicking it for a little over a month. So it'll be fun to cross paths and get a good workout in, and fill those that are listening and may know about you but not know what you're all up to now, because you've got the book. But talk about why you're going to be down here in Austin. Like, just what does your life consist of at the moment?
Yeah, brother. Well, obviously the book, as you know very well, the book has taken up a life of its own already in my life. And so that, and I have 5 baby chicks that I'm like raising right now. So that's really
no funny. Kidding. Really?
Yeah.
That's
We're
amazing.
Like starting, my friend calls it a gentleman's farm. We have like this area outside of our house that was kind of like carved out for outdoor gardening and stuff. But the previous people who owned it never did anything with it. So we ended up, we're in South Carolina, Charleston area, so it gets kind of swampy. So we had to like do some ground work to raise it, and then we're creating this whole outdoor area with a greenhouse and like gardening boxes, and then we have a chicken coop now, and I got these 5 baby chicks I'm learning how to raise so they can lay eggs for us in like 4 months.
Beautiful.
So the book and chicks right now, and not chicks like I'm going out trolling for mall ass, like chicks like baby chicks.
Yeah. Just to be clear, because you never know on this podcast what we're talking about.
So just the baby chicks. But right now with the book taking a life of its own, I'm tied into the Empowered Brotherhood community, a beautiful community of massive community of amazing men who, as you know, you're part of it. So they get together and work out, and then obviously all kinds of other things on the side of that to really grow as strong men in the world today. So going down there to see those guys, do a workout with them, because it always kicks my ass too. No matter how much I work out, I get there and it's always like, Samson or Vladdy or Stefanos or somebody's kicking my ass in a workout. So going over there, do that with those guys, and then also do a little bit of a kind of book signing. So I'll bring about 30 books out there and sign those, take some pictures with the guys, and just kind of get it out there, bro.
Beautiful. And the book's coming out May 16th, correct?
Yes, sir. Yes.
But we can get some early buys in. The name of the book is Design the Man Within, right?
Yeah.
Tell those that are listening a little bit more about why write the book, what prompted you, what's in it. All those good questions.
This is funny because I got this question the other day as well, and you and I were talking a little bit before the show, and the term ruffle feathers came up, and I think my answer to this kind of ruffles a little bit of feathers in the men's space. But the book, right now, just before I go into that, is we're doing a promo where guys can go on or gals can go on and get the ebook for 99 cents. We're doing that promo up until the book gets published. So if anybody's interested right now, you can go get it for pretty much free. Just pay 99 cents on Amazon, grab it, and you'll have the ebook. And then obviously if you want the real book, go ahead and grab that too. Not just because I want you to have both, but because of the fact that I actually prefer real books. So I would buy the real book.
Same.
But so that's that. What got me to write the book, this is really funny. So when I got into the men's space, probably about like 6 or 7 years ago, when I started to do my own work, coming back from being overseas for a decade, I came to my own terms and was starting to work on myself and started to get introduced to some of the men that, we're friends with in the men's space now. And one of them he's like, "Hey bro, you need to read this book." And I was like, okay, I'll read it. Like, this is like the first men's book that I got handed. And
Yeah.
I open it, and all I wanted to do was throw up on it and bang my head against the wall. I was like, bro, I have no reference point for this book. It literally is so esoteric. It's
Mm,
so spiritual. It's so all of these things that I, at that point, had no bridge to get to. And I had no reference point for this in my life. I was like,
yeah.
this literally doesn't make sense to me. I want to like punch this person in the face. Like, I was like,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
terrible.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, all right. Now, full circle is like, I look at that book today. I think it's a good book for men to read. I just think they need to read it later down their path of development so they have a reference point for it. I
Yeah.
think then it
Yeah.
would be more beneficial. At the time, being alpha male, coming from special operations, coming from protection of the U.S. ambassador to Iraq, spending a decade overseas, like all these things, I was like, bro, I was already having a hard enough time trying to humble myself to start getting into self-development, let alone
Yeah.
somebody push this esoteric, energetic like book on me that made no sense. So I was like, dude, we can't, no. So as I started to, luckily I stayed in the development of being in the men's space, and I started to read other books. I started to do my own research. I started to, started to gather my own information on this. And it led me to the fact that, like, okay, now that I've gained a lot of knowledge in it, I've done a lot of work on myself. I put myself in different coaching environments. I put myself in different teaching environments. And I was like, now that I've done this, I need to give the past me a book that he could have grabbed and been like, cool, this is awesome. It's tangible. It's readable. It makes sense to my
Yeah.
life. And
Yeah.
at least cracks the door to self-development as a man, like cracks the door. And that's what I wanted to give guys. I wanted to give guys a bridge so they could grab this other book that a lot of people recommend, and it actually makes a little bit of sense to them, right? So I
Yeah.
wanted there to be that reference point for them. And that's why I created the book, because I was like, man, I also come from a very blue collar family. I come from, people who live paycheck to paycheck. We didn't have time to go waste about like the spiritual connection in the woods and a loincloth and dancing around and stuff like that. Like, that wasn't my life. And so I wanted to give the everyday man a book that he could grab and understand that the author understands who he is, understand that the author gets where he's coming from, and
Yeah.
then also address some of the viewpoints that he's carrying in his life. So I was like, there's got to be a book out there that does this. And obviously I haven't read every men's book. I've read a lot of them. I haven't found one that I was like, this kind of hits the mark. So I was like, hey man, if
Yeah.
there's a gap there, then I can't complain about it if I'm not willing to fill it.
Yeah.
And so came up with the book, Design the Man Within. And hopefully I feel like I landed that mark, but only time will tell.
Right.
And people who read it will tell, right? So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm sure you have, and I'm excited to read it myself. It does make me think about, when I was kind of going through my, breakdown of my life, implosion of my life, when I was in my first marriage, there was conversations being had that I was like, I don't even have the ability to even start articulating my emotions. Or I'd have people be like, well, where are you feeling that emotion in your body? I'm like, what are you talking? Like, what? I don't even know how to even be in touch with. So there was just there's so many levels. And one of the books I read, and maybe this is the book you're referring to, I don't know, but The Way of the Superior Man, so many great parts of it that I'm like, yes, that makes sense. And then so much of that book, I'm like, dude, you're talking over my head. Or Wayne Dyer, just certain things. I'm like, there's so much, like, I know there's so much goodness here, but a lot of it was going over my head, which made me just feel even more ashamed or like an idiot. Like I have nowhere. Help me just start with, changing my life 101, not jumping into the 505 course,
Exactly. Yeah. It's like all those books have so much value. And my desire was to get guys to actually obtain that value out of them, but we got to get them through 101 first, which is what I needed and which is what I value. I'm like, hey man, I was the same way. I was like, what do you mean? Where do I feel this? I have no clue what you're talking about. Like, I can't process any of this information, nor do I have the tools yet to
Yeah.
understand it and integrate it. So
Yeah.
you're right, man. That's exactly how I felt. I was very frustrated, and I don't want guys, because this is like, if we think back to the start of like the men's movement back in like the 80s, right?
Yeah.
I talked, do you know Philip Folsom?
Sure. Yeah, I've had him on the
I
podcast. Love the
I
guy.
throw his name out all the time because he's an OG in the men's
Yeah.
space,
Yeah.
and the dude's just a freaking legend. But
Yeah.
he and I have talked about this, and he's very honest about it. He's like, the early men's movement failed because the blue collar everyday dude got left behind.
Yeah.
They weren't, nobody in the men's movement at the time was resonating with them. That's why he believes this movement's a lot different. And he's like, nobody was resonating with them. And so
Totally true.
I didn't, when after he and I talked about that, I was like, this book needs to be one of those things that doesn't allow those guys to get lost again, that allows them to at least have something that can improve themselves and their relationship with themselves, their relationship with the other people around. So that was like really it, man. I'm just like, I want guys to come along for the ride, because we can all improve always.
Yeah. And I feel like that's where a lot of guys, I've heard that too, in so much of the different stuff that I've done. Like, you know, if you were writing to yourself 10 years ago, where would you have started? You know,
Right.
like this meeting's great, or this adventure is great, Johnny, talking to me, Johnny. But where do I even begin after this? I'm like, oh, that's a great question. So it's cool that you've written a book to kind of speak to those guys, because it's easy to leave those guys behind when you just start speaking to the gurus or the guys that have had a lot of experience.
Right.
You got to take some baby steps.
It's like not even their fault. They've just been so far down the path, they almost forget what it's like to need the 101, right?
Totally.
And it's not a knock on them. It's just that's what happens when we get so far down a mastery of a certain subject, we forget where the 101's coming in at. And so I'm not so far removed from my 101 that I can't, give guys a 101 book, hopefully. And the other part to it was I did read some books that, like, I see men trying to do good things, but they're writing these books that are holding men back to like what I kind of refer to outdated versions of masculinity that are actually harmful to their lives and their relationships. And I don't like that. And so I'm not knocking those guys. They have their way of helping, but I don't want guys to continue to devolve as society's evolving.
Yeah.
And, this is one thing, and we can talk about it if you want, but one of the things that's really come to light to me recently, and as I wrote the book, was the battlefield, right? The battlefield, and I don't talk about this per se in the book, but the battlefield that we have, it used to be like, Johnny and Johnny have a problem. We're going to go meet in the freaking parking lot, and we're going to handle this like men, right? Like that was the thing. But the battlefield is intellectual now. You and I chatted a little bit. It's political now. It's intellectual. It's in the media. It's online. It's having an interview with somebody. It's not physical. Like, physical's gotten eradicated, kind of like the old enforcers of hockey. Like, that's gotten eradicated from our society. And if men can't step up and start standing in their power and defend society as a whole, not just masculinity, but society as a whole, if we can't own that power intellectually, we're going to be painted as these villains, and nobody else is going to see us any different. And that the next generation is going to believe that because we're not available to talk. Yeah. And so I talk about, that's one of the things that I think is really pertinent to that, is because the guys that are writing these books that are keeping men in this outdated version of masculinity don't allow these guys to evolve, to take on the fight where it's really happening, so we can actually raise the next generation to see what a good, healthy, positive man is, who can be intellectual, who can have intelligence and have a wide breadth of knowledge, so they can speak to somebody and defend their position without having to get physical or without having to, oppress them. It's like having that conversation, but being able to do it in a very intelligent way.
Yeah, no, I love that. Well, and so coming back to your book, then practically writing a book that helps men, ensure that we stay on track. What are some of the key pillars in your book that you do talk about, that you're proud of, that you speak to, that guys should be aware of?
Well, it's like one of the ones is the chapters is change the unchangeable, right? So a lot of the things that hold us back is because at a certain age, most of us men think like, hey man, it's just it's hard to change. It's a lot of work. It goes to the old adage, an old dog doesn't learn new tricks, right? Like, or you can't teach an old dog new tricks.
Yeah.
That's not true. Like our minds are have incredible plasticity if we just allow ourselves to embrace that and then challenge ourselves to grow. And so change the unchangeable is just saying, hey man, there's nothing that's fixed within you, and that everything that you believe right now has a root. And if you can learn to rewire some of that and understand what serves you and what doesn't, we can actually change that to then define a different version that you actually are authentic with and you can embody and then evolve society. So it's like one of the pieces that I really addressed in there. It's that owning, extreme ownership. We've heard about this. But I don't think men take ownership for two reasons. I don't think men take ownership for their positive things. And I know, these things, I'm preaching to the choir. They don't take ownership for the positive things in their life. And they actually don't take ownership for the negative things in their lives. They just as much as everybody else, men play victim to external circumstances. Oh, this happened and I couldn't do that. This happened, or this person, or that. And then when it comes to accomplishments, men don't want to acknowledge their own accomplishments, because the fact that, like, if I do something good, for instance, like, man, I was really great with my wife today. I gave her a kiss this morning. I told her I loved her. I was attentive to her. I gave her a big hug and things like that. All of a sudden, my brain just says, well, that's what a good man would do. Johnny King's doing that too. So why do I need to appreciate that? But that was a really good thing. And I should appreciate that, because not a lot of men are doing those things. Yeah. And so we devalue the little things that we do in our lives that are really good. The little things that actually, if we appreciated them, would reinforce a good man. And we devalue that stuff. And so we don't appreciate those. So extreme ownership is taking ownership of both of those things, the negative things that happen in our lives, saying, I own the consequences of that. I own the end date, or the ending of that. What was my role in that kind of provoked that outcome? Because we always had a role. Everything to get to that outcome was a choice. Right. And so it's saying, hey, what did I do how can I own that? And then what did I do that I can learn from, where I can make a different decision if that situation arises again? And then the same thing, how can I appreciate the things that I do in life, even the small things, so I can have compounding interest on the positive man that I am in this world? It's building both of those. It's flexing those muscles. So that extreme ownership was a big one too.
Yeah. I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like obviously those two have a very symbiotic relationship. They require each other to work. But again, if a man has a very limited sense of identity about himself that isn't malleable, right? And he's like, this is just the way it is. Can't teach an old dog new tricks. This is just how I was raised. This is like, I'm not going to grow. Those are probably guys that aren't listening to a podcast like this, but maybe they are. Maybe this is their first, foray into, the personal growth niche, or they pick up your book, they stumble upon it, they get it given as a gift or something like that. You start to understand that, like, okay, if I could actually believe that I am, the sculptor of my own life, and I can change things, even though I've had a shitty upbringing, or I had shitty parents, or whatever shit hand that I've been dealt, I can actually take ownership of that and change it, right? That has a completely different foundational belief in which to create a completely different life, where you're designing your life, you're creating the man that you want to become, you're doing all those things. But if you don't believe that you actually can change, then what's the point, right? Which is kind of why a lot of guys take on that, because that mindset, I believe, alleviates the individual who believes it from any sense of responsibility to change it. And so it kind of gives them up. I don't have to change. This is just the way it is, and it keeps them from failing, keeps them from being courageous, keeps them from disappointment, all the things that we're ultimately scared of. So you got to have a pair of balls to actually do this work, right?
It takes a lot of strength. And it's not even just like the guys that think that aren't even guys that don't, like, like you said, might not be listening to this podcast. They actually are. That's the crazy thing. Like, I have numerous guys who are in their latter years in life who they'll like listen to my stuff and they'll like be like, bro, you challenged the shit out of me. He's like, I got so mad, but like, I get what you're saying. And he's like, I know where I'm stuck. And I get these messages. And I've had guys come to my events that talk about this. They're like, I knew like this is fun and it looks really fun because you're shooting guns, but I also know we're going to do some development stuff. And I know that I need to do something different, but like very reluctantly, but he's making the effort to step the foot forward. And even those guys, they're listening, but they don't realize how easy it is to actually change some of that stuff because they're not sure why they even have that root problem in the first place. Right. You know, that's the big thing. That's why I loved that chapter as well, was because I was like, bro, here's also why we have the root problem. I'm not just going to tell you you can change the unchangeable. I'm going to actually show you through some of the teachings and through some of the education that I've had on why, you know, like going back into Dr. Bruce Lipton's work, into Dr. Joe Dispenza's work, utilizing some of that to leverage and hold up the stance of why we can change the unchangeable. So it gives them some scientific background, and that resonates, as you know, science resonates with guys a lot, right? Like logic resonates with us. We do okay with that, right?
Yeah. Hard to disprove that. For sure.
Right. So,
well, yeah, I think that's amazing. I think that's all the more reason why guys need to go and pick up the book. And we'll put this in the show notes so guys can click right out of the, you know, wherever they're listening to this episode to go pick up you said a 99-cent version of the ebook, right?
If they want the ebook, man. Yeah. 99 cents if they buy it before May 16th.
Yeah. Obviously do Johnny a solid and pick that up, but then pick up the actual book, if you will, and don't be a cheap ass and support all the effort that, because I know, speak from experience, how much effort goes into freaking writing a book and doing all the stuff. It's not, it's a labor of love, man. So
dude, it's the wildest thing was, did you listen to the episode with Joe Rogan and Stephen Pressfield?
Yeah.
Do you remember what Stephen Pressfield said? He's like, I still put out books and think no one's going to buy it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, bro, you're Stephen Pressfield. Like, I love your stuff. And I was like, I get it too, though. I got it. You know, I'm sure you get it as well. You're like, you put your book out and you're like, what is like one guy in his basement going to buy this? Like, who's going to buy this thing?
Yeah, exactly.
You
My
know?
mom's no longer here. So she's, you know, that might be my only sale right there. But no, I'm listening right now I listen to the War of Art probably once a year. You know? Yeah. And right now I'm listening to it. That's one of the things I do when I go to bed is I listen to it while I'm reading on my iPad and I'm underlining shit, just because that Stephen Pressfield he's the man. It's cool to see that, like, he's a regular dude too, that has his fears and his doubts and, you know, and I think that's
very accomplished author and still has his fear and his doubts. So, I mean, I say that just to say, like, there's a lot of effort that goes into books and you can be very accomplished in it. And you're still like the nervousness of like, is anybody going to buy this? Is it good? Did I do a good enough job? Is there like, are there things I should have changed? Like,
yeah. What's interesting is going back to what you said earlier. And I think your book probably sheds a lot of light on that. And it helps guys kind of wake up, if you will. And I felt like, for the first 30 years of my life, for the most part, until I went to my first Tony Robbins event, I was kind of walking through my life as people refer to, like, asleep, as a robot. And there's so much that I learned unintentionally through just life and friends and sports and my parents, or lack thereof, that led me to believe that this is just the way life was and it's just who I am. And it had to take some serious shit hitting the fan for me to finally wake up. And thanks to Tony Robbins, and then from there, so much more personal development, to be like, oh my God, like some of this stuff I just wasn't aware of, how it kind of subvertly changed my or programmed my wiring. And I think that a lot of men have probably experienced that in their upbringing, but that we also need to be hugely aware of it, because as of right now, like you said earlier, just with our governments and the world, politics, how much stuff goes on. And there's so many people like, oh no, of course, there's no way that the election could have been defrauded or, stolen or cheated or all that stuff. There's no way that this would have taken so much, show me the proof. And I'm like, but then when proof comes out through documentaries, it's like, then it's all relegated as disinformation, So all I ultimately want to bring to readers of my newsletter, listeners to my podcast, is like just an awareness of like, just to, again, go back to your first pillar, which is like, you know, be malleable, be able to
Yeah.
change, is to at least question the status quo about yourself, about, you know, the society we live in,
Yeah.
the laws, you know, and everything else, to be like, is this the way that it was originally designed? Is it the way that we
Yeah.
have to accept things to go forward? Speak to that, if you will, in terms of like designing the man within, which is where it needs to start with ourselves first.
Yeah.
But why that's so important, especially in this day and age, for leadership, creating strong men with
Oh,
shit that's going on in the world. That's a
yeah.
big loaded question.
But when you look at the world today and everything that's going on, it's like now more than ever, like we've never seen psychological operations on the scale that we've seen from the pandemic and from the current government for the last couple years. We've never seen this. And everybody, doesn't matter what side on the fence that you're on, pretty much everybody agrees with that, because a lot of people on both sides of the fence at this point are seeing through it. I mean, you can just see through it through the hypocrisy of COVID. The statements they said, the actions they took, everything, the hypocrisy now that it's not even, it's conspiracy fact, right? So it's like they're now, you look at that and it's like, how can you not question these things? So I say all that to give a little bit of credibility to say, if we aren't strong men, that kind of stuff, that 2.5 years of complete psychological operations that was done on our entire population, that is going to continue to happen. And people are going to continue to endanger their lives through things like experimental drugs that couldn't even pass animal trials. They're going to risk their lives by taking something that they've been manipulated to think is okay, while the rest of the people who are strong and confident in who they are going to say, no, I'm not going to do that, because you haven't shown me any evidence that this needs to be taken, A, and that it's even safe and going to help me, B.
Right.
And so now more than ever, we need men to stand up in their sovereignty and to be confident in who they are, so they can critically think and question those things. You know, it's literally the fact of you actually saving your own life, because we're seeing as nowadays, like all of these, there's just another healthy athlete just died, 32 years old, Olympian, died.
I saw that online today too.
Yeah, like from heart failure. And it's like, okay, we're seeing this happen to very young people. This never happened before. Probably you guys should have questioned this before millions of you took it, right? But now that we know this, this should be more of an effort for men to start finding that sovereignty in themselves, not because it has anything to do with political parties, but it has everything to do with questioning anybody, political parties, media, anything that's passed to you. You can't stand in that and question it if you don't know who you are.
I guess that's why what doesn't make sense to me is, and I still have PTSD, if you will. I shouldn't probably use that term because it's does it disjustice for guys that really do work through that. But from the pandemic and having so much pressure put on those quote unquote anti-vaxxers, who this is, you know, a pandemic against the anti-vaxxers, and then how ultimately all the things that they told us, you know, that it was you wouldn't be able to get it, that you wouldn't be able to transfer it, they backed off of all those things, to now where it's like anyone that's had the vax and been triple boosted, they still have gotten COVID multiple times. Like, then why do we even get it? But to get to my point, I just don't get why people aren't more upset. Why people aren't more like, what the fuck were we?
Bro,
right? But they're like, okay,
memories.
Whatever. We'll just move on. I'm like, what now needs to happen? Now they talk about it, you know, Gates and whoever else talks about another even worse pandemic coming in 2025. Like, what the fuck? You know, but people are like, no, it's not going to happen. I'm like, what are you talking about? It already happened just a couple of years ago. And you don't think it's going to happen again? So I just don't understand where the disconnect happens with people who just believe that this is all just conspiracy theory, even though we can see that tangibly it's happened and they went against their word, or they just lied to us. So I guess I'm frustrated with that, where I feel like those of us that are speaking out against it, we're still poo-pooed and said, oh, we're just far right wing, even though I look at myself as moderate or in the middle. I just look for truth,
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
either side
I
of the
mean,
aisle,
yeah, I
So
look for truth and try to be objective, and I would consider myself more of a libertarian than anything else at this
same.
point in my life.
Yeah.
So there's a
Yeah.
lot of things. There are certain things on both sides I agree with for sure, and there's certain
Yeah.
things I don't agree with.
Right.
And for me, when I look at all those things, it goes back to the fact of like the heavy amount of psychological operations. If you can just be objective right now, not you, but like the general population,
Yeah.
if you can
Yeah.
be objective right now and just say, yeah, we were pretty lied to. Like we can all objectively say we were lied to significantly for 2.5, 3 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you can sit back and say that, you should be like, well, where did I land on that? Did I question any of this?
Yeah.
And if you didn't question it and you followed along, this isn't to knock you, but this is to say, hey, what is it that needs to be found inside of you to get you to that point where you should start questioning that stuff before you take action? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's what I think this needs to be a call. We're not going to change people's minds. I'm not trying to change your political views, but I do want you, no matter where you sit, to sit there and be like, did I question it? And if I didn't question it, what does it take for me to build a strong enough person inside that says, hey, let me at least question this, regardless of what party it's coming from and who I follow and who I believe and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Because guess what? I wasn't an anti-vaxxer, to be honest. I actually didn't really, I actually was, I mean, I was in the military. I've had more vaccines than probably anybody listening to this.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't like an anti-vaxxer at all, actually, until I read Robert F. Kennedy's book, The Real Dr. Fauci. Then you'll be like, oh yeah, this is not good. But anyways, I wasn't that way. I just wasn't going to take the COVID vaccine because I literally looked on Pfizer's website. And if anybody actually went to it, you literally verbatim, what they said was does not prevent transmission or contraction, may prevent symptoms. That's literally what it said.
Mm-hmm.
This
Mm-hmm.
wasn't a game of like,
wasn't a vaccine.
It wasn't a vaccine. And
Mm-hmm.
the media, like, it didn't matter what the media said. If you just did a little curiosity and went to their webpage, you could have pulled this up. And I did. It was the same thing when they started, before the vaccines even came out, and they started with the masks, right? And they were like, you need to wear masks. And I look at my wife and I'm like, I'm no freaking virologist, but I'm pretty sure a mask isn't going to stop anything. So I was like, let me do some research, right?
Yeah.
And did some research and found out since 2004, they'd been studying masks, and none of them, and actually majority of them, except for N95s, majority of them actually gave you an increased chance to get a respiratory virus. And even N95s were 65% penetrative, even if you wore them correctly in a sterile environment, which nobody was wearing them correctly, and it wasn't a sterile environment. Totally. So like, I looked at all this stuff and I was like, let me just do a little research. And I did. And I was like, yep, not doing it. Nope, not at all. And that was because of who I am, that I'm confident in who I am. I knew who I was inside, and I knew I wasn't questioning things because somebody I didn't like was saying it. I questioned it because I was like, that sounds a little weird. Like biologically, we did not evolve to want things over our faces. We just didn't, because it's constricting our ability to absorb oxygen and breathe. So like, why would we ever do that to ourselves? So I was like, well, that's probably not a good thing. So let me just ask some questions. Like, what is it about this? Like, I was open to the fact if it made sense, and it didn't. It just didn't. And this was like just the start of it. And Sean Stevenson talked about this on his show, and he actually got, again, banned for putting out this 45-minute like documentary on this. But he got banned for it from everything. So he had to put it out on like Vimeo on his website, because YouTube took him down within like 30 minutes. And his team scoured the internet. They pulled all the data on masks. He gave a whole like 45-minute talk on it, pinpointed all the data. Yep. And when you looked at all of that, you're like, he literally was like, I wanted masks to make sense. He's like, I really did. I didn't go research this because I was like, I'm going to disprove masks. He's like, I wanted this to make sense. And I felt the same way. I was like, if it makes sense, I'll do it. But none of it did. And so at the end of the day, I say all of this to circle it back to, if we can't be individuals first, if we can't have sovereignty in our own and belief in ourselves, we're always going to be able to be manipulated by these things. And they will continue to do this. There's that saying, if you tell a lie long enough, it becomes a truth. What did they do for 3 years? They just told lie after lie after lie, and they told the same lie. And then they made it become truth to a lot of people who couldn't stand in their own self and say, like, I don't really know about this. I really need to question this and make sure it makes sense.
Hmm. Well, and I think that, again, you said kind of bring that around full circle. I think about when before my life imploded personally, I just was very, I had my heels dug into the ground because I actually really, when I looked at it, I was so scared of what I was going to find within myself that
Mm,
was incongruent, that was scared little boy, that was wounded. I distracted myself, or I just, when I had moments of like, hey, we should go to therapy, we should work, I'm like, no, we're good. Like when I really knew deep down inside things were not good, I was
mhm.
not, I was like I could just look at the writing on the wall, but I almost just wasn't ready until shit got so bad that
Yeah.
I didn't have a choice but to wake up. That started my journey of working on myself. And I think back to as well at times where I had moments where I could have chosen to lead and I was a coward. I just
Mm,
folded left and right because I didn't know myself as a man. I wasn't
yeah.
confident, to your point. I wouldn't. So I do feel like there's a lot of people out there who, both men and women, let's be honest, who aren't confident with who they are. They
Oh,
really struggle with their
100%.
self-esteem, right? They have a lot of
Yeah.
unhealed wounds, unhealed trauma from the past that are a direct result of, obviously, you know, their past traumas and
Mhm.
their parents and whatever else, but it reflects upon today's day and age, our society, our culture, the things that are happening, the ways that we continue to get taken advantage of.
Yeah.
So the importance of men listening to your podcast, going to your wild man retreats, reading your book, doing the things that you're putting out there as a men's lifestyle strategist is to like lean into themselves first, to
Yeah.
really work on finding their true center, right? Finding
Yeah.
their own sense of value. Correct me if I'm wrong. This is just my thought process with what you said. Finding their own sense of self-worth so that they can then stand up for the life that they want to design, the
Yeah.
man they want to be, for their families, for the community, for their government, for their world. But it's really hard to do that when you're deeply insecure, you're
Yep.
wounded. You'd rather just pick a fight with someone on social media because they have differing opinions. It's a lot easier to be open-minded and be like, oh, let's be curious when you actually know yourself.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's
Absolutely.
it's it's a threat. I feel like if
Yeah.
you don't know yourself and you're really struggling, it's a lot easier just to throw up a blind and be like, this is the way that it is, right?
Well,
So
yeah, and that's one of the things that I'm, when I was in special operations, we weren't elite because the fact that we were so highly trained that we could do very complex things. We were elite because our foundational skills were so good that we were adaptable. We were
mm,
so adaptable. And
that's good.
because of that ability to hone in on the foundations of what we built all of our complexity on top of, when
Hmm.
anything hit the fan, when things got crazy, when things went out of control, we were able to adapt to the situation and still come out on top. And
Mm,
that was because the foundations, which is what, like, that's really what I've built my business around, on teaching men. And that's what, again, like, back to your point, and you hit the nail on the head on like what I'm doing and who I'm about and everything.
yeah,
But it is exactly that. It's that if we can't build a strong foundation in ourselves, which most people don't have, that because, one, they don't know where they even got all of the beliefs
hmm,
they have, and
hmm,
then two, they haven't taken the time to be consciously aware of what they actually want to include in their foundations and what they want to throw away. If we can't build a strong foundation, we will continue to be able to be pushed around and bullied and manipulated. But
yeah,
when you have that strong foundation, I'll even tell you, like, after I had a strong foundation in who I was. So when I hit my rock bottom coming out of the being in the Middle East and like struggling with my first marriage, getting a divorce, drinking way too much, all that stuff,
yeah,
when I
yeah,
hit that, I came to a point to my foundation. I was at the foundation and it was like, bro, you right now, like you are either going to be, you know how to be elite. You're either going to be elite at being really crappy in your life, or you're going to be elite at being really good again. And you have a strong foundation right now. And that foundation didn't allow me to go down the crappy route.
Yeah.
It forced me to go up because that foundation was so strong in
That's a good
who I
point.
was, that I was like, I'm not, it wasn't going to shake me. I may have had a brief moment of going down in my life, but once I hit that foundation, it was like, bro, it stops here. That's it. You can't go
Yeah.
any lower because I'm not going to
Yeah.
let you.
Yeah.
And so when you have that strong foundation, who you are, there's an inability for you to get totally crumbled and crushed and manipulated and shaken off of your own path and truth and who you are. So that's what I really want guys to find, and women to find too. I want everybody to find that, because if we have people who are strong in that foundation, when the next pandemic happens, when the next psychological operation happens, they're not going to get shaken. They're not going to be scared. They're going to be like, whoa, actually, I kind of know who I am. I should
Yeah.
probably have a little bit more of a critical opinion about this, and just question this and think about it first before I start listening to the talking heads everywhere.
To have your own sovereignty of thought and of mind and of body is obviously something that a lot easier for us to take it for granted here in the States, you know. But I think even with COVID, it was like, oh, you know, we shouldn't take this for granted. And there's so many people across the world who really had their rights, you know, human rights taken advantage of. And I think it's really, it's such a shame. That said, it sounds like it really just sounds like your book is focused on helping men come back to the fundamentals, which would be no different than in sports or in the workout or in the weight room.
Correct.
Or it's like, just get back to the fucking fundamentals, create that foundation, and then from there be able to build who you want to design yourself to be as a man. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you're when you get bored training the same thing over and over because it becomes so easy, that's when you know you're on the right path. Because that's when you know that you've started to build that strong foundation, because you're constantly doing the same thing to build and strengthen that muscle, to strengthen that foundation within you. And so that was, you know, again, this was all lessons I gained in battalion. Was like, dude, I hated going out back to the shoot house that we had built out there and spending after I got off work and on my weekends deep into the night every afternoon. Like, I hated being out there all the time. I was like, I know how to clear a room. I can clear this room sleeping because it's the same room I've cleared for a freaking year. But guess what we did? Second year, third year, fourth year, did the same room over and over and over and over. And the fundamentals are what we have to go back to, because, and the reason why, and those fundamentals, that's the other thing, is those fundamentals get to be different for us, right? That's the whole point. That's part of the book, is to get it. And I walk people on how, I walk them through how to do this, but we identify where their foundation comes from. And then there's work in the book to have them do that, question it and figure out where it is they came from and what it actually is. When they do that, then you know, okay, what do I need to remove? What do I need to put in place? And then I can start training on that intentional foundation. So those fundamentals become yours. And then once you can do that and train on your fundamentals, that's when you can start to build that entire foundation for yourself. And that's where, like, we really, and like, that's where you can get complexity, right? Like, you can start to, this is my whole thing. This is that bridge to guys like David Data, or guys that are kind of in that more esoteric world. This is that bridge to them. It's like, you can get there. That's the complexity, but you got to have something underneath that to get there. And that's got to be based on you and what you resonate with. Because when everything hits the fan, when all of the bullets come flying and the bombs start blowing off, what do you go to? You go to your sympathetic nervous state. Your sympathetic nervous state puts you in the position of resorting back to not necessarily thinking, but acting. And if you're acting on what you've instinctually put into yourself intentionally, year after year, day after day, hour after hour, well, guess what? You're always going to perform to the level in which is going to allow you to succeed, because you did that. But if you didn't harp on those fundamentals, when everything goes crazy, you're going to go crazy. You're going to lose your shit. And then you're not going to be able to instinctually act in the way that's going to put you in the best position.
Totally. So being of again, free mind and spirit to be able to choose, otherwise you go back to, you lose your cool. You got an anger issue because dad had that anger issue, or whatever you were taught, which were just coping mechanisms to survive as a little boy. Right.
Yeah.
And if you don't actually intentionally cut those off at the pass and be able to say like, hey, this far, no farther, this has got to change. I've got to change who I am fundamentally. Then you're going to ultimately you'll be that 75-year-old, 85-year-old who still has an anger issue or a drinking issue or a porn issue or whatever, if you don't actually choose that. So it's good to know. I was going to ask you, but you answered it before I even asked, that there are exercises, there's work to be done in your book that really help guide guys through that process of kind of laying the new groundwork, so to speak. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. Because I was like, I can't do this and not give them some work to do. And trust me, man, like I've been that guy where I didn't do the work. So trust me, I address that in the book. I say, listen, just don't do what you normally do, which is not do the work. Actually, just do the work, man. And I intentionally made every piece to only be like 10 or 15 minutes. So it's like, pull out your journal, do the 10 or 15 minutes of work, at least do that before you move on to the next chapter, and give yourself the opportunity to change. At the end of the day, if you get through all the work and you get through the book and nothing changed, well, guess what? You didn't lose anything. You just remain the same and you didn't die. Like, okay. And you may have picked up a tool here or there, but at the end of the day, like if nothing else changes, at least you gave it a shot. Right. So it's like, just do that, give it a shot, do what you normally don't do. And if you can have any benefit, you gain one tool, you gain one positive aspect from it, that in and of itself should be worth anything for your time and for the nominal amount of money that it is.
I don't see there's no way I feel like a guy could read your book, go through every exercise and come out, equal the same way that it would be in the gym. Like, let's just do these things for 2 weeks every single day. Right. There's no way that you're not going to come out stronger. Just the practice of following through on something, even if you don't feel like something is necessarily shifted, intellectually, you having actually gone through the process, starting something, committed to it, finishing it, is strengthening that muscle of commitment, of persevering, pushing through, doing it maybe when you feel like you don't want to do it, you do it anyways. There's going to be value to that regardless, to any man. So I think that's worth noting. So I love it, man. Where can guys ultimately get the book? And like I said, I'll put it in the show notes, but if the guys are listening just on their phones right now, where can they go to pick up the book?
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate that, brother. It is ultimately, I'd love guys to go on to Amazon to get the 99-cent ebook. That's where we're sending people. That's where we have the deal going on for the ebook. You can go to designthemanwithin.com, and on there you can click, we already have a button for it. It'll take you right to Amazon. You can purchase that, or you can purchase the physical book if you want, either or. So that's where you guys can catch that. And designthemanwithin.com. Just spell it as it sounds.
I would highly recommend, guys, if you're listening to this, go check that out. And like I said, do Johnny a solid with not only getting the ebook, also getting the physical book, and then even taking another level is leaving him a freaking review on Amazon. Speaking from speaking from one author to another, like, help him out. You don't even realize how 60 seconds of your time and genuine words, even if you're just excited to get it, and you haven't read it yet, will make such a big difference in helping reach other guys that need this book. Right. Yeah. So dude, Johnny, that's going to be huge. You're up to so many good things, guys. Also follow Johnny on Instagram, johnny.elsasser. I'll put this all in the show notes as well. Yeah. He's got
keep an eye out to watch the baby chicks grow.
baby chicks, and your all the good stuff that you're up to, the wild man experience, the stuff that you're doing with Empowered Brotherhood. I'm excited to work out with you in a week, all the good things. So dude, just thanks for being here. Thanks for doing what you do. And just, again, knowing how much went into writing a book. you're a beast, man. I'm excited to read it, and it's huge accomplishment. So congratulations.
Thank you, brother. It means a lot coming from you, and I appreciate you. Appreciate your time, and appreciate you allowing me to come hang out with you for a bit and chat up your community.
Yeah, of course. We'll have you back, of course, as always. Just nice to have you back on. Good to see you, as always, and just really want to push the guys to just take some action. It's just one thing. I appreciate you listening to the show, of course, but if you just listen and you don't do anything different, I can't promise you that the needle changes much. So go take some action, pick up Johnny's book, at least at the very minimum, 99 cents. If you can't afford it, I'll send you $1. I'll help you out, pick up his book, give it a read, do the exercises, and join us in this journey of, designing the man within. So Johnny, thank you, brother. Again, I appreciate you so much.
Thanks, Johnny.
Yeah, dude. All right, guys, we'll talk to you soon on the next episode of the Becoming Kings podcast. We'll catch you on the next one. Take care.